This module has been designed to assist Pacific Island delegations prepare for the forthcoming debate over the use of market-based measures as a medium-term measure for achieving the IMO emission reduction strategy. As we will see, IMO member states have agreed MBMs need to be part of the basket of measures since 2009. But no accord has been reached on what types of measures and how they will be effected. In part, this is due to the lack of agreement on how to resolve the potentially conflicting convention of no more favorable treatment and the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. There are critical issues of concern within this debate for SIDS and LDCs. ISWG6 is focused on short-term measures. The outcome is unclear, but no short-term proposals take us close to a 1.5-degree compatible pathway. There is a limited number of measures being considered. Regardless of the outcome of the short-term measures debate, additional measures will be required, eventually including market-based measures or MBMs. The Pacific has previously unsuccessfully submitted that MBMs, or at least agreement on a process to discuss MBMs, should be included under short-term measures. There is common accord in all literature that MBMs are essential to any decarbonization agenda, and this has been previously agreed by IMO members since 2009. Delay is only kicking the can further down the road. What was not agreed previously was which MBMs. Debate over this in 2010 to 13 was acrimonious and inconclusive. The narrow range of subsequent literature strongly preferences a carbon levy. There is a general reluctance to re-engage. The MEPC chair is thus far only committing to, quote, may be considered under medium or long-term measures, unquote. Any discussion on MBMs automatically triggers debate on the overarching principles. The initial strategy recognizes both NMFT and CBDR-RC. There is no consensus or guidance yet on how these are to be jointly accommodated. It is likely that there will be strong divergent views across member states. There are critical issues for SIDS and LDCs embedded within the MBM debate. In 2009, the collective IMO members were offering revenue from shipping MBMs to fund climate change mitigation and adaptation measures in developing countries, in particular SIDS and LDCs. This has been walked back progressively since. In regard to NMFT, there is the relationship of some SIDS and LDCs to the open registry system. And within CBDR-RC, there is a question of where politically SIDS and LDCs sit in relation to the industrialized countries, both developing and emerging. The 2006 to 2011 IMO debate on MBMs included numerous submissions, studies, and expert reports. There is a small body of literature on CBDR, RC, and MFT in relation to IMO. These two recent studies are highly recommended, as shown on the top half of the slide. Kaji et al. 2019 appears to be the first study on MBMs in the context of the IMO initial strategy and considers three primary market instruments evaluated against four criteria, including the principles of NMFT and CBDR-RC. O'Leary and Brown 2018 assesses the legal availability of measures under existing IMO instruments. The full 2009 IMO submission to COP15 is available in link number 1. The IMO summary of the 10 MBM proposals submitted in 2010 is provided in link number 2. Seraphitis 2012 provides a review of those measures, and the IMO assessment process is provided in link number 3 and expands into Seraphitis 2012 Sustainable Shipping Across Disciplinary View. Market-based measures were discussed in the IMO as early as 2006, but members failed to agree on the design of such a measure and discussions were suspended in 2013. The reference to market-based measures as a potential mid to long-term measure in the IMO initial strategy has given rise to renewed discussions. Figure 1 shows a timeline of decision-making events related to maritime greenhouse gas emissions, provides an overview of relevant decision-making processes at the IMO, UNFCCC, and European Parliament with regard to market-based measures for international shipping. Exactly what the IMO considers to be a market-based measure is not entirely clear. By putting a price on carbon, a market-based measure can complement other emission reduction policy tools by providing the shipping sector a broad economic incentive to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and develop low-carbon technologies and products. Stevens 1998 defines market-based environmental policies as, quote, regulations that encourage behavior through market signals rather than through explicit directives regarding pollution control levels or methods, unquote. For example, tradable permits or pollution charges. OECD 2007 defines market-based instruments as those that, quote, seek to address the market failure of environmental externalities either by incorporating the external cost of production or consumption activities through taxes or charges on processes or products or by creating property rights and facilitating the establishment of a proxy market for the use of environmental services, unquote. Kachi et al. 2019 consider 3 general types of MBMs. Of these, only B and C reduce shipping emissions. With an offsetting regime, the reduction is transferred to other sectors and shipping continues to emit. This is the model used in ICAO. Option C, a levy or tax, is assumed to be the preferred option by SIDS and LDCs. Within each option, there are a range of alternative mechanisms. There are major differences between aviation and maritime. That ICAO has adopted a primary offset model should not set a precedent for shipping. What has IMO considered and agreed to previously? The Copenhagen COP15 in 2009 was highly unsatisfactory, in large part due to the issue of CBDR and who would pay what. IMO made an extensive submission to UNFCCC at COP15, setting out members' commitments to a decarbonization agenda in general and to MBMs in particular. Regarding work on control of greenhouse gas emissions, IMO reported on the 2006 Assembly Resolution 8.963-23, which directed MEPC to identify and develop the mechanisms needed to achieve limitation or reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from international shipping, develop a greenhouse gas work plan with timetable to identify and develop of the needed mechanism. IMO advised UNFCCC that the work was well in hand. Quote, The action taken by the committee has been endorsed by the organization's senior-most body, unquote. Subsequently, an ambitious but realistic work plan was adopted by the committee in October 2006, and a significant amount of work has been carried out in accordance with it, leading to the development of a set of robust technical and operational measures that will, when fully implemented, result in significant reductions of greenhouse gas emissions from ships. The IMO reported specifically on MBMs, noting that, quote, the organization has drawn up an action plan to effectively reduce international shipping's greenhouse gas emissions even further. The greenhouse gas work plan culminated at MEPC 59, where a package of specific reduction measures were agreed, together with a work plan for the further consideration and development of a suitable market-based instrument for international shipping. More than 900 delegates attended MEPC 59 in 2009, where control of greenhouse gases from international shipping was a paramount item on its agenda. Unquote. Assessments have shown that a market-based instrument for international shipping may generate funds in the magnitude of billions of dollars annually applied to all ships in line with IMO instruments. Now, the IMO initial strategy has given rise to renewed discussions on market-based measures. But will these start where previous discussions left off? Is offsetting still on the table? If it is agreed that shipping has a strong available decarbonization potential and therefore measures to reduce emissions rather than to offset are strongly preferred, then the two basic options are an emissions trading scheme with a sinking cap or a carbon levy or tax on emissions applied to bunker fuel. A levy would have relatively low transition costs, and there is precedence for IMO to manage and administer such funds. O'Leary and Brown, 2018, are of the view that there is no legal barrier to adoption of such measures via existing IMO processes. So, if we are to have an MBM, then we assume a cost. There are a number of analyses that are saying the costs will have little or no impact on global transport costs, and in the long term will be positive. This would be a good thing for SIDS and LDCs. In the Pacific, costs per capita are extremely high already. But if the costs are negative, then current projections are the impact will be modest for most scenarios, but will be felt disproportionately by SIDS. This has already been recognized during the 2010-2013 debate, and there was recognition that SIDS would need to be compensated. But no agreement could be reached on what form of compensation mechanism should be used and how this would be administrated. A climate levy equally applied by all states is likely the best option for the international maritime sector. If this is agreed, then there are three primary questions. Number one, would it be a voluntary contribution or a mandatory regulation? Number two, how much tax? UMAS has calculated several $100s per ton of fuel is needed to drive real industry change. The carbon price needs to follow a defined, preset trajectory, providing investors with certainty and therefore incentivizing investments in technical and operational measures. To attract wider support and prevent a shock to the industry, the levy could start at a relatively low level and be raised increasingly so that by 2030, the price will make zero carbon technologies economically more attractive for new ships, and by 2050, fossil fuel-powered vessels are economically unattractive to operate. It is also important to remember that the impact of the levies needs to be considered relative to other impacts on operational costs. The most important of these is the cost of oil. In the last 10 years, this has fluctuated from below $30 a barrel to over $110, with oil in October 2019 at $55 a barrel. Number 3. How would it be spent? The industry is signaling it should be a voluntary fund at a low level and spent internally within the industry on R&D and incentivizing change at the other end of the scale. A tax set at a level that forces market change potentially would recoup many billions in revenue. SIDS and LDCs can legitimately ask why this should not feed directly into climate adaptation and resilient funds, as was identified by IMO in 2009. At a minimum, it should provide for compensation for any disproportionate impact on SIDS and LDCs of decarbonizing the industry. In answering these questions, the IMO initial strategy has stated that members need to be cognizant of, quote, principles enshrined in instruments already developed, unquote. The IMO has set out 3 principles, but does not limit consideration to only these 3. Non-discrimination and no more favorable treatment, the NMFT, and common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities, CBDR-RC. There is an obvious tension between these principles that arises due to the unique scenario of international shipping and the now embedded practice of flagging under open registries. No guidance is offered yet by IMO on how these differences could be reconciled, although it is hinted that CBDR in the situation of SIDS could be offset by increased technical capacity assistance. Additional principles could include A. The principle of polluter pays, B. The precautionary principle, and C. The principle of adopting a science-based approach. Debating how this suite of principles is given effect to under a MBM raises serious and far-reaching debate about the overall structure of the industry and the decision process of the IMO, its global regulatory body. In this regard, the debate is already skewed against SIDS and LDCs due to their low levels of representation and the way the IMO is structured to favor large states in its higher decision-making bodies. IMO suggests regulations follow the convention in MARPOL that measures should be non-discriminatory and that there should be no more favorable treatment of ships. This means that port states that have ratified a convention, including a potential convention with a market-based measure, are obliged to apply the rules laid down by this convention not only to ships flying the flag of a party to that convention, but also to vessels flying the flag of non-party states. Thus, the NMFT principle ensures that if countries do not universally agree to the implementation of a measure, such a measure can still be successfully enforced by port states to all ships coming into their ports. To gain political acceptance, it is likely that any MBM would need to be applied universally under the NMFT principle. Without application of the NMFT, a market-based measure that exempts certain flag states is very likely to be ineffective, as 75% of the world shipping tonnage by deadweight is registered in developing countries, a number of which may opt to not participate in the scheme, as reported by UNCTAD in 2018. Despite being described as a principle, it can be argued that NMFT is actually a convention that has become assumed into practice over time through repeated use and the increasingly international nature of shipping transactions at all levels. NMFT is often used to argue that a level playing field approach is needed across the industry given its inherent international nature in order to avoid market distortion. However, it is difficult to ignore the glaring anomaly that 75% of the world shipping tonnage by deadweight is registered in developing countries. This is a direct product of the open registry system established post-World War II, which now provides the benefit of anonymity and tax-free status to the majority of the industry. This element of the level playing field is now so embedded into the international industry, it is difficult to visualize the industry in any other form today. While the majority of ships are flagged in the developing world, they are not spread universally. Whether a CITES or LDC is deriving state income from its flag will likely influence its political position on MBNs. This potentially creates a division between CITES or LDC member states that would not otherwise exist. According to Kachi et al. 2019, under NMFT, an exemption from any levy at country level is not possible, as the industry will simply gravitate to nominal ownership in those states. Exempting ships flying the flag of LDCs and CITES is also not desirable because of the tentative relationship that the ship's emissions have to the flag of the ship and the large share of the global fleet that is registered in the developing countries, including a number in CITES and LDCs. Panama, the Marshall Islands, Liberia, Hong Kong, China, Singapore, and Malta are the largest shipping flag states. Together, they account for 63% of overall tonnage and 52% of global carbon dioxide emissions from shipping. Other prominent global shipping fleets are also registered in countries outside the OECD and include Hong Kong, Bahamas, Indonesia, Antigua and Barbuda, Tanzania, Bermuda, Malaysia, Vietnam, Russia, the Philippines, Kuwait, Thailand, and Taiwan. Most of these are non-Annex I countries of UNFCCC purposes. Moreover, exempting certain states from the offsetting scheme would violate the principles of NMFT. So CITES, LDCs cannot be insured against negative effects by exemption. The IMO initial strategy requires development of any measure to pay special attention to the needs of CITES and LDCs in general. With respect to matters such as a country's geographic remoteness and the connectivity to main markets, transport costs, and food security. The economic impact of a carbon price is likely to differ between regions, with proportionally higher impact on the GDP of remote small island states, depending on the geographic location. The alternative to exemption then is either a direct financial compensation mechanism or to offset by ensuring that the revenue from the levy is used, at least in part, to benefit the needs of those states most impacted and in most need from the effects of the climate crisis to which international shipping and the international trade it supports contributes. So, if it is agreed that all should contribute to the levy without exception, where are the lines to be drawn to agree to the formula for allocation of revenues? Answering this political question is one of the core issues that agreement could not be reached on by IMO members in 2013. However, if we are also agreed that the 2009 IMO position that MBMs are a needed component of a basket of measures required is correct, then this question must be resolved. The difficulty for the IMO is it must be addressed via cognizance of CBDR-RC. Unlike NMFT, CBDR-RC is a universally applied principle that comes originally from UNFCCC. Under the Kyoto Agreement, for purposes of climate change, the world was divided into Annex I and non-Annex I states, reflecting the historic beneficiaries of climate change and therefore those with an absolute responsibility to take action. Shipping and aviation were parked outside Kyoto given their international status. This led to the classic haves and have-nots divide being established. The Paris Agreement recognized that while a small group of advanced economies have most directly benefited and therefore have greatest responsibility, the scale and growth of emissions of the emerging economies mean they cannot be ignored if the emissions target of well below 2 degrees with ambition for 1.5 is to be met. The Paris Agreement recognizes that all have responsibility to act, but this is tempered by their capabilities and their individual development scenarios, which in turn reflects their national determined commitments to the global effort. Shipping and aviation again have been parked outside, within their own respective UN agencies' jurisdiction. What does this mean for shipping? IMO is clear that there is a special case for SIDS and LDCs to be exempt, or at least actively protected from any disproportionate negative effects of a decarbonization transition. The core question, however, is whether this sets a precedent for all developing states to claim similar. At the 2019 UNSG Climate Summit, both India and China were clear that they expect to be recipients and not contributors of enhanced calls for climate finance. And of course, for the debate over MBMs, NMRT, and CBDR-RC to be an equitable one, then fair representation of SIDS and LDC state interests need to be part of the negotiations. There is some way for IMO to go to meet this test.